Ah,
Perfect.
got it.
Let's see if I get I mean, it used to be you had to have a key and then
Speakers on.
Yeah. That's good.
No.
Well, hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay, folks who are on the Zoom? Yes, okay. Very good.
I'll be up here till 7:30. You had asked me what time we were going to have dinner. You have been bringing it up or leaving it down there if you're comfortable with that. Thank
People
you.
should mute.
Yeah, friends, yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started, but yeah, let's have you go on mute if for the moment. Well, good evening. I'm glad that you're all here for our Lenten workshop on revolutionary nonviolence. We're going to go ahead and begin to do some check-ins. We're still waiting for Reverend Lawson to join us. Hopefully he will be here shortly. And but let's hear from people about, everyone has been reading this book or thinking about the lessons and the teachings of nonviolence. And I would just love to have a quick go around. Everyone can share your name and sort of what is, as of now, what's a key takeaway that for you, or a question, right, if you're still reflecting on this, what's a takeaway or a question about this work of nonviolence, either for personal practice or for community practice. And then let's go ahead and begin with our folks that are on our Zoom screen. I'm going to switch over again. Gallery view here. Okay. Yeah, let's go ahead and begin with folks who are on our Zoom screen. Lynn? Lynn, do you want to begin?
Me?
Yeah.
My name is Lynn, and my question is for Reverend Lawson. What can we in Nashville do right now?
And why don't Jane?
Well, I'm Jane, and I have the very same question. We're in a situation here in Nashville, and we need some help and advice with it. Thank you.
Brenda, would you like to share?
Hi, everybody. I have appreciated so much about the book that we've shared, as well as everybody sharing their experience in our discussions. And the takeaway that I'm going to keep living into is, what does that look like as a lifestyle? We've talked about definitions that have given me a lot to consider, and the idea of nonviolent practice and process in the midst of tragedy and crisis as it shows up and has shown up in our city this week. And then when it's not in its full expression and we have some reprieve, how do we also keep practicing? So just appreciate being in that process with you all.
Hey, this is Becca and Scott and Marcus, Ben.
Howdy.
And we don't have any questions. We are thrilled to be listening to Reverend Lawson, and we'll take in anything he says. And Rita.
Thank you. Tina, do you have a question or anything you want to share reflecting on this time?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tina. No, I don't have anything. I just appreciate everybody being here and having a chance to listen to Reverend Lawson.
Wonderful. Well, I think Reverend Lawson is now here. So I'm going to go ahead and spotlight him and ask him, Reverend Lawson, if you can hear me, please, I'm going to spotlight you and go ahead and go unmute yourself. Yeah. There he is.
Okay. All right. Oh, yeah.
Hello, Reverend Lawson.
Hey, how's everyone?
We are good. We are good. So good to see you. Here we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm just trying, give me 1 second. I'm just trying to center your get you spotlighted here. Okay, there it is. Okay, there we are. Hey, well, Reverend Lawson, thank you so much for joining us this evening and this afternoon for you.
You're welcome.
We have a room full of folks here from St. Augustine's and the wider community in Nashville, and a good amount of people on the Zoom as well, many of which have been engaged in your book on revolutionary nonviolence for the past 5 weeks. So we started hearing a few questions as we were gathering around. And I think so something that seems to be pressing on people's minds and hearts at the moment, as you know, has to do with the mass shooting that happened in at a school, Covenant School here in Nashville. And people are just reflecting on the urgency of the work of nonviolence and your teachings at this very precise moment. And so we would just love to hear, obviously, your wisdom And then on that, and we can just continue the conversation and take questions if that's okay with you.
All right, I'm at your beck and call.
So why do you think this book that came out last year, what is the critical lesson that we must take in at this moment?
Oh, I'm not sure that I understand that question.
What is the key lesson that you believe we must practice, I guess, at this moment?
All right, you represent St. Augustine's Church congregation.
That's correct.
Okay, so I will just say it bluntly then, that the task of Christianity is to take Jesus seriously and become practitioners of nonviolent struggle. Give up all support of violence, though that can't be done. This is not an issue of purity, because if you're a member of our nation, you pay taxes, and those taxes provide for the largest military force in the history of humankind and for the largest war economy that anyone knows anything about, and has us in over 800 military bases on almost every continent, as far as I know, with naval fleets and submarine fleets and air fleets and soldiers planted all over the world. We've been almost in continuous war the entirety of the 21st century. And we have, our soldiers are in at least 4 countries in Africa today, shooting at African boys, at African forces. So in my judgment, it is time for Christianity to no longer talk about just wars and fair wars. There are no such things and never have been. Dwight David Eisenhower, our president in 1952, became president in 52. Yeah, that's right. Said that war is hell. And you can't use hell to create anything that's heavenly. Hell won't get you there. So it is past time for Christians to stop supporting evil and sin. And it's time for Christians to see that Jesus of Nazareth, whatever else we want to call him, if the 4 books that we have about him are anywhere near correct, Jesus of Nazareth represents a nonviolent God, and his ministry represents nonviolence.
Yes. And you're saying that made me think about, this is a paraphrase, but something that Gandhi had said, obviously one of the great teachers that you have drawn from in your work, that when he heard about Christianity and its principles, he thought, yeah, that would be a really nice idea if it were actually practiced as you suggest.
And he also said that Jesus is a nonviolent practitioner, and everyone knows it except the Christians.
Yes, very much so. Well, we like that you're blunt. This is part of what we need as a community to learn and to grow and to act. I think as I had mentioned, this has been a really difficult week in Nashville in particular because of this shooting.
Absolutely. absolutely. But Nashville people must not take the blame for it. We are the most violent society in the history of humankind. We're the most violent society in the world today. And we have trusted the gods of war so much that we are convinced that violence is the way you manage and dominate and control things. Therefore, that's what we have practiced. And so our society has now reached a stage of its change and its evolution, so that we have mass killings almost every day somewhere in the country.
That's right.
It's according to the FBI. A mass killing meaning one scenery, one killer, and usually 4 or more people being killed and others being wounded. So that occurs now more than one a day. Most of these we don't hear about, and whether or not the Justice Department and other departments of police keep records of it so that we know precisely where we are, I do not know. But there can be no easy calls for nonviolence in my judgment, because the work of justice and truth and dismantling the false myths that we have about ourselves is a major piece of work. And I have not seen in the public conversations on TV. I don't listen that much to radio broadcast, but I do generally read a couple of newspapers a day, and do generally read a number of news magazines still. But I see nothing in that conversation and that reporting that suggests the way we can go. So I assume, therefore, when you have something like poison ivy and you keep walking through the poison ivy, your condition gets worse, not better. So
Yes.
I assume that we cannot anticipate now being at the stage of mass killing, that this will decrease. I don't know what that future holds for us, but it looks very, very bleak politically and otherwise.
Yes. And you've repeatedly called on the need for, especially in this 21st century, a resurgence of campaigns rooted in nonviolence, rooted in both a personal adopting of the philosophy and deep belief in nonviolence, and then the collective action that looks like. What do you think what kind of nonviolent campaign is necessary to dismantle what you just described?
Well, I've worked for the last 30, 40 years, 50 years now, almost, on nonviolence with poor working people and with local unions. And I've been able to see a lot of unions adopt nonviolence. I remember in one of the very first workshops back in the 80s, when local union Unite Here had me doing a series of workshops on organizing according to nonviolent struggle, that in one of the very first workshops, some of the organizers and executive board people talked about they could not love the enemy. And I said to them, well, the first loving you have to learn to do is to love yourself, and to love each other, and to love your families, and to love the neighborhood where you live, and to love the city of Los Angeles. That the big command of nonviolence is not about love your enemy. That's a Jesus command. But the big command about nonviolence is that you translate love into nonviolent struggle. You love yourself and your neighbors and your friends and your colleagues sufficiently that you help to organize them for justice and for dismantling racism and sexism and violence and plantation capitalism in the midst of yourselves. And so it's a bottom-up recommendation that I make. It's not a top-down, it's a bottom-up. Sufficient numbers of unions and congregations adopting nonviolence as their way of living, and probably most of us are living through love, not through hatred or resentment. We're living through observing and our own dignity and the dignity of others. So it's not really that big a step, but the only way this nation is going to be transformed is if in tens of thousands, if not millions, of campaigns, small, medium size, and large, in which nonviolence is proposed. And I would reiterate what is in the book, that the notion of nonviolence is not a notion of English grammar, someone having taken the word violence and putting a non in front of it. The Gandhi intervention of nonviolence in the first 23 or 24 years of the 20th century was his translation of the Jainist term, Hinduism, ahimsa, an ancient term, goes back to probably 600 years before Jesus of Nazareth, and it was the religion of his mother and of a nanny, so he remembers it. So the term nonviolence, as I use it in the book, and as I've tried to live it, is for me not a hyphenated word. It's nonviolence, and it is Gandhi's translation of the term ahimsa. I'm not sure exactly where, when he did this, whether in South Africa or India, but South Africa was for him very much of a university of life, and so it may have been done there. But in any case, he translates ahimsa into the word in English, nonviolence, without a hyphen. And he also insists that the nonviolence, the non, is not a negative term, but a positive term. It means love in all of its positive forces. So, is that enough for talking? And well, one other thing I want to say and emphasize, and you in Nashville should know this very well. We Black folk, under the impetus of Rosa Parks refusing to get up her seat, get up out of her seat and give it to a white male passenger who was standing, we Black folk from 1953 to 1973 began the process of the desegregation of the United States of America.
Right.
That process is still going on. It's beginning to reach much higher places than we knew of in Nashville in 60. But we did this, and we did not hate anybody in doing it, nor did we shoot guns at any sheriffs or any police. There were, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, more than 100 martyrs of that movement.
Yeah.
Black, almost all Black, but there were several white martyrs who were killed as a consequence of their support of that movement. But fundamentally, we Black folk began that process, massive process of desegregation. And we did not do it with guns. We did it with nonviolent struggle. And while there were thousands of us who went to jails, we did not do it with hatred. That is a marvelous historic example in the United States and almost unheard of.
Right.
Because the media likes to talk about the civil rights movement. Well, but we're not talking about the civil rights movement. We're talking about what the late Congressman John Lewis called the nonviolent movement of America. And I date that nonviolent movement of America. That was a part of the larger campaign called civil rights. I date that movement 1953 to 1973, in which we had very specific campaigns. The Mississippi Summer of 1964, the Chicago Civil Rights Movement of 67, Sanitation Strike of 68. Many specific campaigns that fundamentally pushed the country legally, constitutionally, and otherwise, but most of all, maybe spiritually, to begin the process of desegregation. While all that work is not yet done, the emergence of Trump, the emergence of the forces of spiritual wickedness in the United States, I use that term deliberately, the forces of spiritual wickedness. It comes out of the United Methodist baptismal liturgy, the forces of spiritual wickedness that Trump represents and has pulled up in opposition. In spite of that, the nation continues to make spiritual, political, social progress in the right direction. And some governments at the state, local level support that continued desegregation. Others do not, but one day it will inundate the society and it will help the nation then, as Martin King said, become faithful to the Declaration of Independence and to the preamble of the Constitution.
Yes. Yes, we do have and I'll open it up to take some questions in for folks that are here in person in the room, but we have one question from David, who's with us on the Zoom, sort of following up on an earlier question I asked, which was, what might a coordinated, nonviolent, and effective response to the gun cult in America and Nashville look like?
No, ask that question again.
Yeah, it's a long one. What might a coordinated, nonviolent response to the gun cult in America look like?
Well, weeping over the mass killings and praying over them and starting little memorial symbols of flowers and whatnot on the street with pronouncements from various kinds of political figures and all. Maybe the only thing that people can think about in doing. But in the summer of 1921, May to August, Black Lives Matter had somewhere between 15 and 25 million people in the street, multiracial, multi-ethnic, all kinds of religious people there in the streets, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, in more than 2,500 places in our country in that 3-month period, May through August. And they effectively put on the agenda the issue of the continuation of lynching of Black people by the police. And some progress has been made. The confusion in BLM since 21 has caused the progress to not be as fierce or as relentless or as disciplined as it could have been. But that's a good model of what people who want to fight the mass killings might do. In the case of BLM, they have helped families to personally grieve. They've become a kind of a religious order, enabling families who lose members of their families to the police shootings. They've taught many families how to grieve privately and publicly. So I would think that that might be a great model for going after mass killings. But you have to remember that that's a model, 2021, of 10 years in the making.
Yeah.
It didn't, that summer of 2021 didn't just happen.
Right.
BLM effectively put grief on the map and helped families do their grieving personally and socially, and put the issue on the table. It's too bad that whatever's going on among them now has stopped that important piece of work. This is one of the reasons why such a movement ought to have a discipline. Such movements for social change, for social justice, must develop a staunch, athletic-like discipline of nonviolent struggle and philosophy and purpose, because movements for social change must have a greater discipline than the enemies we are trying to transform. So I would occur in I
Yes.
would So I would propose maybe Nashville can be the place for such a movement to begin that could demonstrate what could be done.
Yes. Thank you. I'm going to get out of the way and see if someone have a question right now ready on your mind. So I'd ask you to come forward and ask it so we can hear you through the Zoom. If not, I'll ask the other question I have. No pressure, no pressure. Okay, Reverend Lawson, I have another question from Yuri, who's also with us on Zoom. I'll just read it. It's in the chat, but I'll also read it to you. Father Lawson, I am a Latina seminarian studying at Sewanee, University of the South, the only institution of higher education designed from the start to represent, protect, and promote the South's civilization of bondage, and launched expressly for the slaveholding society of the South.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that by walking on the sidewalks of this institution today, I walk every day in nonviolence. This, however, has put an emotional and mental load on me. How can I use this suffering to educate and transform?
What suffering are you talking about?
Well, Yuri, feel free to speak up.
Thank you, Francisco. I think the suffering comes from the way I'm seen as invisible. People try not to see me. People pretend not to see me. And there's quite a bit of dismissiveness to my voice sometimes, or just to my presence. Many times, sometimes I'm sitting at a table, with a few clergy members or seminarians, and everybody's invited to introduce themselves, but I am not invited to introduce myself. And that's just one example, right?
No.
I know it's not right, but I'm just saying that's just one example.
I don't go for a lot of the popular talk.
Yes.
You have been birthed as a human being. It is your task to make certain that your life demonstrates that humanity that creation has given you, that the universe has given you, that God has given you. That is a formidable piece of work, to claim the humanity.
Yes.
You have heart, mind, soul, strength, according to the literature of the Hebrew and Christian Bibles. You can love God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, your neighbor as yourself. The fortifying, the claiming of that gift of humanity is the number one task that each of us has to do. Any suffering we have to do because we're Black or something else, or because people, is a suffering we do not need to do, because we can claim the gift of our humanity. And we can use the weapons of the Hebrew Christian Bibles that allow us and enable us and empower us to claim that gift that can stand against all the forces of spiritual evil in our time. So the first task for everybody, the first human homework for every human being, is to claim the gift of creation, claim the gift of the universe, claim the gift of God, and cultivate heart, mind, soul, strength, neighbor, God, so that you can stand as a human being fortified in that humanity. A lot of this popular stuff I hear going on, I think is wrong. When I look in the mirror as a 14-year-old boy, I saw Jim Lawson. And I knew that he counted as a gift of God. I knew my life was there. At 14, in all junior high school in Ohio, I knew my life mattered. It was gift. And it could stand the task of living, but living out of that gift of life. So I think a lot of stuff going on in our communities on you don't see me. Well, you look in the mirror, you should see yourself, and you see that you count and matter as God's child. Now, I know I'm being a little mean here. I don't mean to be. But you don't have the gift of life for the purpose of weakness. You have the gift of life to live it. And maybe one of the problems is that we don't want to live by the way of love. We don't want to live out of the gift of God's grace, God's creation. But that gift is formidable. And no amount, if you cultivate the gift, even in the midst of concentration camps, the gift will be apparent in you in the midst of suffering. So I don't go for a lot of this stuff, but I have to see myself in the mirror. You have to see, I have to see myself in the mirror. No, I don't. I see the gift of life, the gift of God. I have to see someone who looks like me on the stage. No, I don't. I can see a fellow human being. If I want to get on the stage, then I should make the effort to get on the stage. And so a lot of the hokum going on is popular, but it's not biblical. It's not the first chapter of the book of Genesis. And it's not the 5th chapter of the book of Mark. And there's, I want to give no support to that false view out of my own thinking about these matters.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Yuri, also for being open to and vulnerable. Reverend Lawson, this conversation reminds me of something that you said in a TED talk that you gave maybe about 7 or 8 years ago. And it had to do with this notion that we are only, as a human race, we are only maybe tapping into something like 10 or 15% of our true capacity to act and to live into that power of creation that you just described. Mm-hmm. And if were we to really tap into that power and that strength, then imagine that what we could do. So I'm just captivated by that idea and wondering if you have any further reflection on that, on our human capacity to tap into what you just described, that soul force.
Well, you've said it well, Francisco.
Following your lead.
I'm not sure how I need to add to it. I do happen to think that the first chapter of the Hebrew Bible is a key chapter, and the gift of life from God is really almost immeasurable, unimaginable, and we have not yet begun to tap that gift. I find it,
Did we lose him? I think we just lost him, but hopefully he'll jump back in. Right in the middle of a thought, too.
He probably just. Is anybody?
Yes. Let's just stay with that thought. Because my next question was going to be, what prevents us, right? What prevents us from breaking through to that other, whatever percentage it might be, 70%, 80%, it's large. I mean, what prevents us from getting there?
My question would be, how can we best help the youth and students of today in the way that they led the civil rights movement and the sit-ins with the gun issue? Like last week when it was the students that were filling the gallery and the rotunda. Like they are going to lead the way in how we best let them do that. Yeah.
I can't imagine many people have thought of this. Okay. We talked about how we enable, how we allow our students to deal with this and all these aspects of the emotional nature of it and so on. I thought doing something about it is how we do that. Actually affecting something. And it occurred to me, not a simple solution, but if we decided we weren't sending our children to school and something and the challenge is everyone's got a different situation. I can't, and that's where this answer is like, well, I can't do that because what's the story we all tell ourselves that in every aspect of our lives that will play out in that question. If we said to people, we're going to refuse to send our kids to school, so something I have to make a living. I have childcare, I have this, all these things. But if that next day they lost a child, they immediately realized that they had. So I don't know how that would be orchestrated, who would bring that about. We're in Nashville. It happened in Nashville. It's a unique moment. It's a unique location to be able to affect change. What happens here is significant because of the legislators being here. All those things are kind of, pile on in a positive way. Change. How would we make that? We don't have children in school right now. If we did, because I couldn't say it's okay.
And is it all possible to work with the next generation? I don't know how many people, there's some really women talking, but when they were talking about how the boys have been good students, it's how they react, and then the women, we said the women the students do. How are we teaching young people? Are we supporting guns as boys? That's a huge thing was in our household. I grew up in this. So it's amazing to me that these questions are just now being asked. These are questions I grew up with and stand that we had all our life. And I was stunned that other believers were on the same page, because to me that was part of the Christian experience. One thing being that we don't pledge allegiance to the flag. That is an idol. We only pledge allegiance to God. I mean, the very word allegiance means one thing. So it's changing a whole mindset of not country for, country. It has to start with teaching the next generation. And I mean, obviously all ages, but particularly, how are we modeling to young children what's acceptable, what's not, what video games, it's just what toys. I mean, we were given a hard time because our boys couldn't play with guns. And we didn't call sport toys, and didn't use the word guns. And so I think it's very important to be active in my roles as this generation, but to be teaching a new way of what do we pledge our allegiance to.
Well, I think the idea of a boycott is a natural one. Have this example of sex boycott and how connected that was. I think schools are really to contact and also, but also that for the schools right now, as they want students to pass, especially with the voucher programs, they want people to leave school. There's something behind it. They already want people to the public school system, or they want them to use their vouchers to go to public school, to charter schools, or homeschooling. Homeschooling is a really big Christian nationalist movement right now, and that actively is destructive against the school because it takes people out of them. Lessons support from and they go, here's my money. Which student? I have a student that's sitting out that student left in the public school system. And I think that taking kids out of school with that would actually give us the exact opposite of what we want. We need to support public school. We're actually under I actually see that within the politicians don't care about this. With our public school problem, and it's shocked to see that it was a private school. As many people probably credit about it, we stay there in public school. The government knew somebody, causing it, and there's some time. So, private schools are already considered safer, but they're really not. They're guiding side and it's not a black on black. There's civic issue, it's guiding all of us, and so don't think taking it out to you guys because all we do is that's not going to be all schools, need to change the policy for the school. In fact, this is part of really important. The brain
Another thing, I mean, that's a really important point you point out. Think about it. Picking up on what Reverend Lawson said about the nonviolent struggle, that period of 20 years, 53, 73, right? You have Brown versus Board of Education. You have the whole we're in that whole process, right? The desegregation of schools that was resisted from the very beginning, right? And there's still, and it wasn't until like the early 80s that here in Nashville, the desegregation process saw its completion, whatever that means, right? But it was somewhere in the early, think about it, right? 1983, 84, I don't know the exact year, somewhere around. So, what we're seeing now in terms of the attack on public schools has been around since Brown versus Board of Education, right? Since there was an attempt to make schools more accessible, more equitable for all people, right? So just to add to that point.
I think, to be clear, my suggestion was school, not the school.
Oh, yeah.
And I think one thing that I'm thinking is, because money is at the bottom of everything, private schools, if kids are told from those schools that creates problems. If enough problems are created in both areas, especially private schools, people, that's a problem. They're going to have to change because they're losing money, they're losing people, they're losing staff. I mean, it's a wild. And I understand problems that you're having in the public side. But on the private side, it could actually create a catalyst, draw, administrators and people that use those medias. You know, I don't know how you, probably kids would be the way you do it. Kids would be.
I was just gonna say also one thing in the chat to go with this, what to do is also the continuing, the teachers and students are continuing to plan demonstrations and not just a one-off and Moms Demand action in every town. So Candy put in the chat just the Civic Tennessee Coalition event, but there's been a lot of events that are coordinated. I think it's not in the chat, but from it, I think that's also what's needed is coordination. That unfortunately we have Sandy Hook, we have every town, we have Florida Movement, we have Moms Demand because this continues to happen, and coordination of those groups together for children to continue to be given support from their teachers, their families, and the educators in the schools. Again, it gets into the complexities of the child walks out, they're suspended, and that's a liability issue for the school because they're the caretaker and anything happens. So again, I think that's where maybe community comes into place. Is some kids get dropped out of school, they take the public transportation to school, they have to walk through those doors. So how do we as a community make sure that we have enough people of same age there to say, hey, we're gonna have some members there if you want to make sure your student is with an adult, or that there will be some adult to go to. I think that's an immediate thing that I know can help support some students with parents. Like I can go to one, or I can go on Tuesday, but I can't go every day this week.
And that happens.
Yeah, yeah.
Make sure they come through.
Yeah, I think that's a huge way to continue to uplift the students to be able to participate.
We need to work on Lawson and running the tournament question difference. You say an awful lot of messages out there, social media, and lots of other places. The Speaker of the House is there for insurrection, January 6th. That it was not. It was very different sort of thing. That's another message put out there to use and distract from the issue. You know, they want to talk about it's a mental health issue. Well, you can walk from here to state capitol and you're running mental health issues without a doubt. There are mental health issues in society. You can't deny that, but that's not the common factor in all this.
They can't hear.
I think that's the reality of our situation right now.
That's not a common factor. You know, I had lunch with a friend on this. You can't think of a single human interaction that's proved by introducing a weapon.
Right.
I mean, you've got to stay on message and on focus. The problem is weapons. And introducing weapons to schools, which has been one of some of our politicians' solutions, through a school resource officer, is not going to work.
Yeah.
And you know, in my life, I've been weapons qualified 5 different times by the Department of Corrections, by Metro Police. I don't carry a gun. There's not a gun in my house, but it was not information that I felt I needed to have, and it was part of the job that I did. A individual, a rent-a-cop with a 38 on his hip is not going to stop somebody from that way. And you know, that's the thing, is you've got to stay on focus. You've got to stay on focus.
I guess one of the things that's so frustrating is there's so much support for guns. Yeah, so it's crazy. You know, I constantly amazed at people who will lift their hands and talk about, can't wait to go home and be God, but carry a gun. And they're going to kill an unbeliever so that they can live, even though they say they're excited, because it's, I don't know where you start to change such a deep-rooted problem in the Christian community. The opposite of the teachings of Jesus. That nothing is really changed in the Bible.
I wanted to add something. Inspired. I get inspired by after conflict. How they led that march, brought our lives, all the speakers that they brought together.
Okay, I'm back in.
So the aspect of their
Welcome back.
All right.
Here, the message that we're all saying, right? And then it was hard for me when I'm struggling with this particular is I'm seeing that represented there from wherever he was in Tennessee that said that. Burkett. And that's what's telling me inside right now is that, and it killed me every time. Particularly Sandy Hook was very monumental for me. That over and over and over again, these people are so deep into the cult of guns that you were talking about that every single time they choose the right to own a weapon that they don't need. I heard somebody say, why do you need the AR-15 in particular, this lady in California? And she said, because I can. And I'm like, you're right that you can doesn't supersede any child's life, any human's life. And that's where it gets so heavy that you have a hard time getting up every day because so many people continue to choose that right over the lives of children and teachers that are educating our youth. And that's just one level of all the things that's being attacked right now. And so I think what I wanted to ask Reverend Lawson is how do you, 94 years, I'm so grateful for doing this work. But how I know the love yourself part that helped me. And that you start with yourself and bottom up and I'm listening. But man, sometimes it's hard to keep getting up because you keep, you're just like, come on. Like children are dying, trying to go to school to learn and to have their next day. And it just is very hard and keep doing, keep doing the work and you keep marching and you keep saying and doing things, meeting people. But man.
Yeah, Reverend Lawson, we were just, I hope you heard all that.
No.
Okay. What we were discussing sort of all kinds of things, everything from sort of tactics, strategy in terms of approaching this gun violence issue. What can we do here in this moment in Nashville, as you had said, maybe Nashville could be the place where we have something of a coming back to these lessons and these teachings. And just people struggling with different parts of it, right? With entrenched political leadership, right, at the state level that refuse to hear any kind of any change on gun policy, and just the difficulty of trying to work in this context. And obviously, you know that all too well, given what the sit-ins and Memphis and all that you did here.
But we should not expect political leadership to know how to lead us out of some of these problems.
Yeah. Think about George Wallace. Oh my God.
Huh?
What I was saying is,
Well,
I mean,
okay.
Wallace.
Yeah, look how many political leaders you have in the state of Tennessee elected who are fragile human beings who may have a hole down the middle of their souls so they can understand nothing that the citizens of Tennessee are feeling and understanding. They have no experience in desegregating, deracializing, desexualizing the society, in eradicating poverty and lifting up democracy. That's something we have not learned in the United States. Some communities have. Tennessee is not one of the states what I would is doing that work.
We're really good at
So
generating.
unless the citizens plan a strategy for making it happen, it's not going to be done, at least not in your generation, our generation.
Right. Was there a question over here? Yes, Kim.
For everybody, everybody it's not just, it's school, but, you know, very close to things, the grocery store.
Kim over here was asking, would something of a strategy like a national walkout, or to me it sounds like a general strike. It's something like a general strike where it's not just schools, not just kids, but the wider public. Could that be something, could that be possible, and could that be effective in some way to address the gun issue?
You'd have to organize it. How would you organize it?
I know it. See, that's the hard thing.
That's the big question.
You can't just organize it with, you'd have to strategize it and organize it. It might be something that could be organized with internet, but it'd have to be well done.
Yeah.
A national strike, national stop work might be helpful, but that would require a strategic effort.
Enormous amount of organizing.
Well, set a plan first. I mean, national desegregated with a plan that operated from January of 1959 until May 10th of 60, when all the segregated signs came down, restrooms were renovated, and so forth. Let's see, we made the decision in June of 1959, desegregate downtown Nashville. We launched our preparations in September. We did our first demonstration for the campaign in February of 60. May 10th, renovations had started in restrooms, waiting rooms. Signs had come down, and downtown merchants were serving Black people who asked for a cup of coffee. So let's see, the decision was made in June of 59. May 10th, it happened.
Yeah, I mean, your call for a disciplined, consistent amount of training, and the athletic image. I mean, is a, I think, a serious and important call. Even though it's sort of, there's a unique moment where we're in. So this week there's a series of actions and people want to do something and want to get active. And that all, I think that is important. And what you described in terms of a longer campaign needs to get built.
Boy, the kind of activism that we start up after a mass killing prevents doing the kind of activism that will have an impact upon the problem. Interferes with the kind of activism that will have an impact on the problem.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, the United States has a lot of activism, but too much of the activism is unconnected with nonviolent struggle and turns out to be not that good.
Well, with the few minutes that we have left with you, I think when we got cut off, we were talking about trying to tap into that other percentage of the human capacity, and we were wondering what prevents us from getting there, right? What prevents us from really pushing through to that larger ability to be nonviolent?
I'm not sure that that's a number one question. I have an observation to make, and that is, in my years from 1950 to the present moment, I don't know of any nonviolent campaign that white people have pursued in the United States that is effectively attracted attention or effectively accomplished a legislative purpose or a political purpose or a community purpose. I cannot name one.
That's a strong observation.
Is it because they already ask why?
Is it a question of power? Someone is asking, someone wants to know why.
I don't know why. On the issue of racism, white people have been afraid of being called a N lover, so they have backed away from doing anything. Now, maybe that's a serious part of the issue. The Me Too movement looks as though it's put male domination and sexism on the map in various places. But maybe more was done in the 20th century by the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, which said that you could not discriminate, though it had no enforcement power. The Civil Rights Bill of 1964 for the first time, Congress said you cannot discriminate against people in the employment market. You cannot discriminate by race, by national origin, by gender. Let me think. By religion, by where you were born. Yeah. So the Civil Rights Bill of 64 began the process of desegregating the work scene in the United States by gender, by faith, by race. All right. So that that's where you know, a lot of women were able to get new and better jobs out of 64. And in fact, some Black folk in the Black community used to complain that it was white women who was benefiting most from the Civil Rights Bill of 64. I don't know if that can be established or not, but I know that was one of the things I heard. Of course, Me Too was started by a Black woman. I don't know. I haven't seen reports on their work, so I don't know how they function around the country and all. But the AFL-CIO, a national organization, what they call an international organization, all during my college years and my years in India as a UMC missionary, AFL-CIO was so busy supporting the Cold War that it did almost no organizing. I mean, I was astonished by that. Personally, did almost no organizing, but World War II in the 50s, ordinary families, working families needed unions badly, like the nation must have them for economic justice. But AFL-CIO, that was almost entirely white male, really didn't push any organizing campaigns. The push on organizing campaigns have come since the 1980s, where I think maybe the sanitation strike in Memphis in 1968 had a little bit of influence, but our organizing work in Los Angeles, where we currently have more than 800,000 people in unions and more than 200 local unions, has been a big push towards getting AFL-CIO to think in terms of organizing our nation into unions, because there will be no economic justice in our plantation capitalism without organized labor, which is why plantation capitalism fights organized labor so vigorously with its literature and its law firms and its anti-strike groups. And all of that is designed to keep economic justice becoming the model of our economy. And it's another heritage of slavery.
Yes.
So I can't explain all of this. I can only describe what I have watched and seen.
So we're coming towards the end of our time, and maybe you made me think about talking about labor. At the beginning of our conversation, you talked about Christian communities needing to really get behind Jesus in as a nonviolent actor, and to really engage the tradition seriously. But what of labor? Do you think that there is a possibility for multiracial movement, nonviolent movement, where workers of color and white working class workers might come together for some nonviolent change?
Oh yeah, it's happening all the time. The teacher strikes that we read about, one in Nashville, one in LA, one in Chicago. A number of teacher strikes are very multiracial, multi-ethnic. So the teachers' unions are, and I don't blame them, they should be striking steadily, because we've pushed education down to the lowest denominator in terms of priority in our country. And it ought to be our number one task. The education, a world-class education to every child born in America, a world-class education ought to be our purpose as a nation. And it is not. And in many places, as a priority, it's gone down.
Yes.
I grew up in Northeast Ohio, where there was a high priority of quality education in elementary schools, and not only in Massillon, Ohio, but in the surrounding areas of the cities about our size. Education was a priority. So I was able to get a first-class education out of elementary and junior high and high school, in college, and that has been a blessing for me all my life.
Yes. Well, we could talk with you for hours, but we know we've covenanted to be with you for this time, and we thank you so much for your wisdom and your grace and your patience, and for your urgent call to us about our task ahead. And we're just so grateful.
Well, appreciate the chance to be with you, Francisco.
Thank you so much. And you should know that our next step is to continue, after reading your book and this conversation, is to come back together and to really take seriously what is the campaign that we will collectively work on following the 4 steps. So that is our task ahead.
Very good.
Work to do.
Well,
thank you so much.
You all take care.
Can we take a photo?
I don't know if we can do that or not. Can we?
Yes, stay where you are. You just stay where you are. And we'll let's see if I can get everyone on the Zoom screen here. I'll change it to a gallery view.
I don't like that coverage. It's okay. Okay. Still my book. Someone else to take a picture.